Welcome to the Shout Out with Sage show. Shout Out with Sage.
Shout me out.
And that's all I gotta say. So shout out and let's go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stream and Hub Radio. I'm Sage Stevens, the host of Shout Out with Sage. Today, I have an actor, artist, a writer. She recently made the big move to LA. I want to welcome to the show, Nikolina Page. How are you, Nikolina? Thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, Sage. Thank you so much for having me.
I see that you speak a whole lot of languages.
Yes. Which one would we like to commence with today?
So you speak French, Russian, English, and Spanish.
Yes.
How did you get into all these languages?
So Spanish started in North Carolina around when I was 5 years old, where I was born. And we even had to do the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish and in English every morning. And it sort of comes back again later. But then when we moved to New Hampshire, when I was 9, I started French. And then I got to speak French as a child with a girl from Martinique who didn't speak any English. And it just opened up this world. I spent a lot of time in Quebec and France.
Oh, bonjour, ça va?
Ah oui, très bien. Bonjour.
Yes. Well, yes, we both share that Canadian heritage, I think. So yes, yes, very cool. Yeah. And you recently moved to LA. When did you move to LA?
It was about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So, and I came from Mexico, actually. I was doing an independent film down there and then just was ready to come here.
Wow. And how did that transition happen? And what do you think of LA? I mean, you've lived in a lot of different places, so what's LA like?
Wow. It was one of those moments. I like to, like you said, I've lived in also Russia, which I started in undergrad and grad school, and then I lived in Ecuador and Mexico. And I always knew LA was coming, but it would call me when it's ready.
Okay.
And during the pandemic, when things sort of calmed down, we started shooting in Mexico, and then I stayed in Baja Sur down in Todos Santos for about a year. And Iñárritu came to shoot Bardo, which is out now. And I was actually doing background with that, got to meet the documentary crew. We all hung out. They were heading to LA, and I was like, it's time. So I met them all back in LA, and they're like, did you follow us? And I said, maybe.
Yeah, you were a stowaway in the luggage, correct? Right? Yeah,
Pretty much.
Sure. And what did you shoot in Mexico? What were you doing in Mexico?
Yeah, it was this independent film about horse racing, an American who comes down to Baja to sort of get away from it all, process after the pandemic, and ends up getting caught up with these gamblers in horse racing. And we had real people from Baja Sur, is a big horse ranchero area, and we had an actual horse podiatrist as the lead jockey. And it was really incredible.
How did that opportunity come about for you? How did you get the role?
So that was really fun. I actually did it. I got the connection from going to Sundance in 2020 before everything locked down. Mm-hmm. I just went with a friend of mine from Colorado. We had been doing a web series, and so I made these business cards with my headshot, and I just put my business card down in Atticus Bookstore, I think is the name of it, where the coffee shop is. And a few months later, I got a call from someone who saw my headshot from the director, and we talked and exchanged information and started going into pre-production for the show. I was going to fly to LA, but then lockdowns happened. And once things opened up again, we all met up in Mexico and made it happen.
Wow, that's like quite the story. How it all happened. So what made you want to get into acting originally?
When I was that was sort of my original love. Although if I really go back, I mean, I grew up in North Carolina in the 90s. I was born in 88, but I actually did stand up with my babysitter when I was 9 years old.
Okay.
I know. My parents were really cool to let this happen, but she had already been an amateur comedian at Charlie Goodnight's, and I just loved stages. I was the only child, so I'd make this, I called it Star Starch instead of Star Search, and I'd make my parents hold flashlights and put up bed sheets with curtains, and I just loved
Right.
to perform. So I just loved performance, and then we moved to New Hampshire the next year, and I was in Beowulf, the rock musical at
Oh,
8, 9, 10. And I was just sold on musical theater. We moved to Ithaca, New York, the next year, and that has a huge Broadway, New York influence, and so I just started training in that since I was 10. But then when I was 18, my parents were like, "Get a real job, get a real career, leave this all behind," and that's when I
right,
started doing
right.
all the Russia stuff and international relations, but came back to it.
Okay. What other roles have you done?
So I just got back into all of this. Well, my last stage show was Merrily We Roll Along, which is
Mm,
Stephen Sondheim. I was Med Kincaid, and that was my freshman year at Brown University. I was
mm,
also in Rocky Horror, which was my favorite childhood musical, actually, since I was 9. But I didn't actually end up performing it because I was just in that space of what does society want me to do? What does my family want me to do? What do I want to do? And so I ended up just going to Russia and living a drama for a while after that. But in 2019, after sort of starting my life over in Ecuador, like you do, I went to Colorado and was Ann Deaver in All My Sons, which Arthur Miller play in Boulder.
mm.
And then started doing my own continuing a one-woman show that I started in Ecuador, and that became sort of an art film and just kept going with other creatives.
Okay. So you were in Russia, then you went to so how did you end up in Russia, and then how did you end up in Ecuador?
All right. So Russia, the first time I went, the first time I went was in college. I went first the summer in St. Petersburg, and then I spent my whole junior year in Moscow, back when I was gonna be a diplomat or something.
Mm. Was
And
that, just to interrupt, sorry, did
yeah,
you feel a lot of pressure to like go to an, more traditional than be a creative or be an actor?
yeah, no, my dad is a veterinary oncologist, so we had science, and then my mom raised me. She also had, she was a editor and came from a more business family herself.
Mm,
So, um, being an artist was just sort of something you did for fun.
yeah.
And even though I'd been in some adult Meisner studios since I was 16, and I've been voice training since I was 10, I really wanted my family to be happy with me. And also, university is really expensive. So there was a lot of,
Yes, I know. My mother makes me feel guilty about having a degree in whatever I got my degree in, and not in, sort of going a different way. So
yeah, you get it. And ironically, the recession happened right as I graduated. So I would
Mhm.
have been better with a theater degree than a
Right,
Russian degree at the end
right,
of
right.
that, because everything changed 2009, 2010 anyway.
Mhm. Right.
Um, but my other love was always languages, other than that. So I really dove into that, and I loved living abroad. I always felt freer when I was abroad. I
Mhm.
felt like whatever rules I was raised with, even though my family wasn't really culturally Southern, I think
Mhm.
I really took in that women were supposed to be wives, and which is cool if that's what you want. I tried that on,
Right.
and I can play a desperate housewife. I've been a desperate housewife multiple
Right,
times.
right, right.
We're good, but, being abroad was special, so I ended up my first marriage was in Russia, again, because if I couldn't be in drama, I might as well live
A
a
drama,
hundred
right.
in opera. That didn't work out,
You're doing research for future roles.
basically, like,
I
the
think
funny
I think I've done that myself a few times. So yes.
it's method, right? It's very
Yes.
method. Yeah, the fun thing when I got back into the arts was I was like, well, I haven't trained in 10 years. I hadn't done it professionally. And I would talk to writers and they're like, oh, tell me about your life. And they're like, can I get the rights to this? I had no idea.
Right.
And so I lived in Boston doing accounting. Then I went to Seattle to get a master's degree where I started computer science. I worked in computer science in Seattle, and then ended up as a housewife in Michigan eventually, passing through yoga. And then I was going to Ecuador, getting ready to have children when I got back, sort of as my last sort of pre-family starting thing. And after 6 weeks, I had uncovered a lot of things about myself and realized, among other things, that I didn't want to bring children into. I hadn't lived my life for me ever. And so I just started over from Ecuador.
Okay. And how recently was that? That was
2019. So
okay. So pretty fresh.
Yeah.
And so you are now you're now in LA, you're going after the acting stuff. Are you feeling better about things? Like,
I think as soon as I made the decision, and even back in Ecuador, I didn't, even back then, it was scary and hard. It was kind of the decision I knew I always had to make in this life to kind of not repeat it in the next. Sort of a karmic choose what made me happy. And I knew that as soon as I made that decision, even though I didn't know what was going to happen next, I hadn't been offered the performance artist in residency. All I knew was I was in Ecuador. I decided to get divorced, and I didn't know what the next day would bring. And I knew my parents were pretty pissed. But from that moment on, I was like, whatever happens from here on out, I'm making the right choices as far as honoring myself to be the most honest person that I can be, which was terrifying.
right.
Being raised to please everyone else. So it was interesting getting to LA, because first I started in Colorado, which is a really nice landing ground because there's a lot of creatives, a lot of people who burned out from LA, retired in Colorado, and could sort of prep me. By the time I got to LA, I understood why I needed in my life 10 years of yoga and spirituality in South America before I got here, just to finding myself.
To be able to like deal with all of the egos and attitudes and personalities. And yes, I just worked a Grammy event on the weekend. So yeah, that was a lot. So yeah. So I understand. So you breathe a lot. Do you breathe a lot?
Pranayama. I do my 108. I can keep track. I was going back to some old school Lakshmi mantras that make me really happy. Yoga in the middle between the Russia and Ecuador, which are really good points. I was dealing with a lot of mental health. I was dealing with substance abuse because I was so miserable, and yoga.
Okay, so because you weren't doing what you really felt you should be doing, you were angry and you went down another path. Do you want to just sort of chat about that a little bit?
Sure, of course. I mean, I am really happy that, maybe even 10 years ago, I didn't know where life would head. Actually, it was about this time 10 years ago when I decided I needed to go to Peru. I just heard an NPR show about ayahuasca and the studies and research in the 60s about healing addiction and anxiety and depression. And I had been through therapy. I had PTSD because of that marriage from Russia and alcohol abuse issues but I didn't know what was underneath, what was really missing. And so I was in Seattle, which was very new age and even in an energy healing school, but I needed more. And so I went to Peru when I was 24, 25 and spent 3 weeks in the Amazon, like 8 hours by boat with the Shipibo shamans, and did 3 weeks of deep, deep healing, and just sort of started following the breadcrumbs ever since back to myself.
So you tried, sorry, I can't say it, ayahuasca?
Yes, yeah.
What was that experience like?
obviously for me, magical because it got me to here. The way I would explain it is, it's considered like the mother or the grandmother spirit. And basically when you go into it, because I had never done anything hallucinogenic, I was kind of afraid that even though I'm all hippy dippy now, people like can't believe there was a time where I really wasn't. Uh, and back then I was just kind of like, no, like I'm afraid I wouldn't want to come back to this life kind of thing. And with ayahuasca, if you ask for peace, it's kind of like she shows you everything, brings up everything that's not peaceful that exists in your psyche until you're finally like, you know what? Forget this. Like, I'm not going to stop trying to solve this. I will just choose peace now. Like, it's that I can just choose it. I can just make a decision, and then it just, and that can be really intense. So now I can still even meditate with the medicine of her. And when I went to Ecuador years later, which about 5 years later, it almost seems like 5 years. I go to South America and then I sort of process for 5 years, follow the trail, and then I get called back. Now I ask for a little more compassion when I work with the medicine down there. But yeah, it really opened my heart, and it gave me my purpose again, which was to, raise the vibration of love in the way that, you think of the Beatles would with music around the world, or just something that I can express from my heart that touches other people's hearts. And with all the languages, like, world peace, the whole
your hippie dippy self is coming. Yeah, it's coming out.
Yeah. So it's getting there.
So through all of that, like, so it sort of healed your trauma, helped you find your path. So you decided to come to LA for the acting. And what's your experience of LA been like so far?
So I find, well, first off, LA is the first place in the US that I feel comfortable, because I was always weird. Yeah, it was like everything that was bright and colorful about me was finally celebrated. Like there was no way that I didn't fit in, because anyone can kind of fit in here. So that was a relief. After Ecuador, I had kind of planned to spend 3 months in different continents. And the reason I came here was to start networking back to more international work. But I really loved it. I feel like LA is kind of like living in a quantum field where everything and nothing exists at once. And wherever you are, you'll meet it.
I sort of understand what you're saying. Yes.
It's it was really exciting, and it is interesting. And when I first got here and was very optimistic, a lot of things opened up, and then a lot of memories of traumas that I hadn't fully healed from being kind of objectified as a housewife or as a female image in entertainment started coming up and presenting itself for me to heal. And that was really intense. And I just had to kind of chill. But also it's been great. I found, representation teams. I'm on SAG, I'm represented, but then now I'm finally getting back to creating my own art in addition to being in other people's projects.
Actually, how did you get represented? How did that opportunity come about for you?
So it is also this magical game of aligning with the right people, because there's so many people in LA trying to do the same thing. And I would say, ironically, that Instagram has been my best friend on so many levels, because it's a really nice way to find independent filmmakers, but also I had met with a friend who had been interviewing with a lot of different managers and was just really inspired. And I made a pact with another friend of mine, like, oh, we're gonna connect with managers this week, because I had representation back in Colorado, but hadn't landed it in LA. And I saw someone looking for someone with foreign language abilities. So right. So that suddenly, like, everything about my life made sense. And I reached out and I was like, I speak all these languages. And we really hit it off. And because I'm also a Canadian citizen, she got me rep in Canada and then in the UK, so I can get back to Europe as well one day. And It's been really beautiful. She's been so supportive, and it's been great.
That's amazing. I want you to hold on 1 minute. I'm just having a tech issue.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I just need to do something, and I will be back in one second.
Sure.
Sorry.
All good.
If I can do. Okay, hold on.
I'm holding.
Okay.
Can do the Macarena.
Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. Whew. Let me see if it didn't. What the? Okay, there we go. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm back.
I know we're out of the retrogrades, but like lately, there must be some other
Yes.
planets moving around because
Yes. Okay, I just didn't. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're all good. Okay. And okay, so you have a manager, and so how do you? So for people that don't know, what's the difference between a manager and an agent?
Yeah. Manager is someone who's there for you through your career to help you in the bigger picture of your life. And then the agent, and they submit you for auditions and pitch you to casting directors in different projects. But then they also find you the agents in the local different areas. So she got me agents in LA, in New York, in Atlanta, in Canada, and the UK, so that she's helping me build a team so I can have a full length career. And as I continue to work and work with different people, just finding the right fit of people who get me, she helps me discover my brand, and from that angle of it, so I can be an artist again. Like that was the biggest feeling, was I could actually focus on my art because I have someone helping with running.
Yeah, you need a team to do all this. You can't do everything yourself. Exactly.
Oh yeah.
And what's coming up for you? What other projects do you have coming up?
So I have always auditioning, always seeing how that's going. But I am getting back to as well live performance arts. So when I was in Seattle, I actually started to right after I came back from Peru in Seattle, I followed. I sort of told the universe, I don't know what branch of the arts you want me to go back into, but I'll follow where it goes. And my boss at the time said, well, the Burlesque Academy is starting up. So I joined up there, which was also very spiritual and very empowering space. So I started creating my version of burlesque, which is very sort of performance arts, weaving in yoga and Russian stories of my life. I even did an act where I sang in Russian, had this sort of like spy thing, but from what happened in Russia, I lost my security clearance, so I can never continue with the foreign service. And so then I finally ended for the big reveal. I was like singing, but also like putting black paint across my body, like you do.
Okay.
So I'm also getting back to that kind of stuff is very vulnerable and it's very ephemeral. Like I perform it and I let it go and kind of let it pass. But now I'm starting to write again. That was one thing I wanted to learn more of after doing my one-woman show in Ecuador and in Colorado. So I am sort of starting the third phase of that. I've been writing several different scripts, but writing is humbling. And
writing's a tough. Yeah, it's tough. I write as well, and it's definitely yeah. I feel your pain.
It's so fulfilling, but it is like when you realize how much impact it's neat. So much of life can come through, but it's tricky. But I'm also going to get on comedy stage again for the first time since 9 years old. It's happening this year.
Really? Well, make sure you invite me. I would love to support you with that. I think getting up there as a comedian that would be very frightening.
I've actually, starting last year, I started writing like I write in my journal a lot of stand-up acts, and I have friends in stand-up, and they started reading it with me, and they're like, oh my gosh, you have a show in a notebook, just go do it. And I think there's a responsibility when you start a story on, like, especially a comedy stage, because if you're bringing part of your life to it, you are imposing in a way your life on others. So you need to be open to the feedback that the comedy stage is bring back. So I needed almost a year to keep
I don't know if I'm really up for that feedback, but yeah, I got you.
I know. I had to, like, I was like, well, maybe not these topics for a few years, but these ones can be fun.
Right. Well, you can be selective in what you want to do since it's your show, right? So totally.
Yeah.
What's your biggest piece of advice for someone wanting to move to LA?
Oh, I heard, like, if I just reflect on the advice that was given to me or that I heard, which was all great advice. It was like, have all of this money saved up and do this and do that and be ready. And I had kind of spent my life getting ready and doing everything corporate and organized. And I came here with nothing. I literally, it was like in 1 week, I decided to move here. I gave away everything I had apart from 2 suitcases in Mexico. I called a friend from college I hadn't seen in years and said, hey, can I crash? And I lived with 25 people month to month, no car, and a co-living in Hollywood.
Oh my God. Okay.
And I just bussed and trained everywhere. I jumped into background work just to get to know where studios were and what that was like, and just get to know LA through being on sets. And I know everyone says, like, oh, it was cool. It made me happy. I would just say, follow your heart. If you know you want it. Also, the nice thing is I'd already lived and experimented a lot of life stuff. Right. So that was not a distraction. And that helps because LA could get very distracting.
Got a lot of choices here, a lot of choices to make. Yes.
Yeah. But and to be gentle, I think you get to LA, and I've never felt in such a rush in my life before. Almost like if I'm not rushing, I may be falling behind. But just realizing that, 10 years ago, I was pretty secure. Why can't I be secure here? And just enjoy the fact that 10 years ago, I had no idea I could, like, this wasn't an option in my head, and just really enjoy the moment of being here and enjoy the wonderful people like yourself who I've been able to encounter. And that's really what matters.
What other hurdles have you faced while you've been here?
Oof. I mean, I think I'm really grateful for my Canadian citizenship, to be honest, because while living in LA, I'm able to, and also in some ways, since the pandemic, since things have become remote, even in ways that they weren't in the corporate world beforehand, like I can audition for anywhere in the world. So in LA, if it's not my time yet, or I'm still building relationships here, which should be the case. Everyone works really hard, and everyone is where they are because they've worked really hard. If it's not my time here, then I can keep developing projects all around the world and not bringing that pressure into it, because there's really, I never, at this point in my life, I was like, I'm not giving up on this. There's no
well, you did a while for it, so you have to give it its time. Definitely.
We're 2 marriages past, like, that's just not, we don't need that. We're good. Right. But I think there's times where you're just like, I really don't know if this is going to work out, but I'm here for the thrill of it. And yeah, I had to definitely keep healing. Like I said, even after 10 years of what I thought was healing, there was just a whole new layer to be this kind of vulnerable and exposed in the entertainment industry, and put myself out there in ways that I forgot that was used to be comfortable for me. And then life happened, and I was like, oh, okay, this is new again.
Cool. Very good. What would be your biggest goal that you have for your future?
I think for me, what I've always loved and what I helped what I remember when it gets hard, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, because as an artist, it can be easy to be swallowed into that. Even when everything's going really well, you just think, oh no, this is it. And one thing I experienced when I was abroad, whether as a performer, because I was lucky when I was 15 and I went to France with my grandmother, and I was singing all these French arias at the time. And I was with my grandma and this like retired people's tour of France. I sang, yeah, and I was like 15. I was like, all right, at least
Sexy.
yeah, I was like, I'm here to party. And I started to sing arias and French 40s music. And in the restaurants, we'd go to dinner and they would start to invite me to like the waiters would come, so I spoke French, and say, oh, the chef wants you to sing for them in the kitchen. And so what happened was every city we went to 13 cities in 11 days. I started singing and talking to people, and just like out of the blue, they just felt comfortable with me. And they asked, this is going to sound really silly, and but like they asked for my autograph. And when you're 15 and you're going through puberty, and people used to say like, you're like, yeah, they're like, you're interesting in a European kind of way in the US. Like I was made fun of here a bit, but like to go to Europe at 15 and just be like, wow, you're not the American we thought you were, but you love our culture and our language. And I want to get back to Europe or anything. When I like being in Ecuador and Mexico, performing in other countries in their languages, being the foreigner or the spy or the multilingual expat from who knows where, the vaguely European person who speaks all these languages, and is just sort of blends in and just shows, this sort of globalization. The internet came out when I was 9 or 10 years old, and that connection, to be able to connect with people around the world and continue to do that, like even on the Trans-Siberian Railroad out to near Siberia, like people were just like, oh, like you're an American, like this, like the movie thing, like Nicole Kidman, this thing. And I was like, cool, whatever. Like I was just so happy that there was this connection and love, and I want to get back to that international work. So that would be my goal, is to get back on international screens and stages.
Right. And what do you like the most about being an actor?
Ooh, so much from that. I think there was always the joy of catharsis in that I remember since musical theater was my first love, and being on stage in Ithaca, and I would just feel the sensation that I wouldn't be able to identify till I started doing yogic and different things later. But I would just feel this other emotion take over me. When my life is confusing, I had clarity playing somebody else. And I could allow every depth of emotion that wasn't safe or allowed for me to process in real life. I could allow it to come on stage, and people would cry with me on stage, and they would have a transformation. Kind of like you watch a horror movie to scream about the things you can't in real life, or you cry with a movie about the things you don't feel comfortable crying in your own life. So I like the process of being a cathartic vessel for others, and then also getting to live other lives. And also now I get to honor the entirety of my life through these characters that I can now reference.
Right, definitely. Well, how do people find you on social media or your website? Why don't you let us know how we can follow you and track you down?
Oh, thank you. So Instagram, I am Nikolina.actor. So Nikolina. And then my website is Nikolina.page, which is my last name, which also happens to be now it is a suffix for website. So I actually get to have my last name as the suffix. So it is literally just Nikolina.page in the URL. And that's building, and that includes more of my performance art and yoga stuff that I still practice and share. And it's just a little weirder than more of my mainstream acting persona.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Well, oh, yes. And before we go, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to, someone that was really pivotal for you so far in your career?
I would like to shout out 2 people, if that's all right.
Hey, whoever.
So the first one is Iris Dice. She is the creator of Durga's Tiger School in Ecuador. She actually was an actress and director from Berlin, moved to Ecuador a couple decades ago to raise her son in a place that was more family friendly. And when I went to Ecuador to study Tantra yoga, shamanism, and quote unquote the arts, I hadn't accessed myself as an I no longer had given myself permission to be an artist. And being with her and through that process of allowing energy and yogic energy to flow through me through dance and music, it came back. And I literally wouldn't be here today. I remember looking at the program. I had heard about it from Boulder in Colorado. A girl I had actually grown up with in North Carolina was a teacher there, so I knew there was some cool life energy. But I remember I looked at it and I started crying before I went, because I knew that whatever was on the other side of that program would be a complete paradigm shift. I couldn't even see it. And then as far as LA, I think my life has really changed here since I got the chance to start working with Easy TV and Michael Masucci at the 18th Street Arts Commission, because I think coming to LA, you have a life from beforehand. You've sort of seen yourself, but you come to LA and there's so many people to see. And I felt really seen by this performing arts community that has a heritage of supporting feminist and queer and just multimedia, digital arts, and leading into the future. So I found a really nice home in LA that I get to express myself in the full colorfulness and creativity. I want to say thank you as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Those are great. And thank you so much for being on Shout Out with Sage today on Stream and Hub Radio. It was a great interview. I love hearing your story. It was a very diverse path to get here, which many people have, myself included. So I'm sure I will run into you at an event or out and about somewhere soon. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
And have a happy Valentine's or Galentine's next week.
Yes, you as well. Thank you again.
Cool. And thank you everyone for joining us today on Stream and Hub Radio. I'm Sage Stevens, and this is Shout Out with Sage. See you next Wednesday at 4. Bye, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.